sometimes there's certain paintings where you're like, I just need to let it go. But it potentially creates like all that paintings ends up being an underpainting and creates such beautiful, rich color combinations as a result of all those previous layers. So that's why I never throw anything away. Like I'm always like, oh, kind of, I have so many different works in process. I'm always putting things aside. And if they don't work out, it's annoying and it's frustrating. But I'm kind of like, well, I've been painting long enough that I know that like eventually that will reemerge as something else.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mastrius for this sneak peek with artist and mentor Cameron Schmitz for a demo on painting intuitively. At Mastrius, you get personal feedback, teaching, advice, and support from a Mastrius artist of your choice so you can reach your goals in your style at your pace. I'm your host, Anna Zanella, and today I'm thrilled to introduce you to one of our mentors, Cameron Schmitz, or this mentor sneak peek. So Cameron is an oil painter who interchanges the method of both representational painting and intuitive abstract painting to develop her work, working on a variety of surfaces and substrates that includes canvas, wood panels, and paper. Her dynamic paintings are often marked by her use of color, light, and expressive brushwork, evocative of fleeting moments captured in time. In addition to her full-time painting practice, Cameron teaches workshops and mentors emerging artists, and we're very lucky to have her as a mentor here at Masters. I'm really excited to dive in to see what Cameron's going to show us today. So I will pass it on to you, Cameron.
Thanks, Anna. I'm excited to share a little bit of my process with you today.
Enjoying the video? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell to be notified when new Masteries videos are added.
So just a little kind of back history of me as an artist. I was trained as a representational painter. I now, after painting for 20 years, have realized that as an artist, it strengthens my work to work both abstractly and representationally. When I embarked on painting intuitively for the first time in my life, I felt so reinvigorated with my art practice and my art in ways that I hadn't felt since I had started painting for the first time in my life. I felt like I was actually learning how to paint all over again. And so, so about 10 years ago, I started, after my first child was born, I started exploring painting without any sort of reference, any sort of photographic reference. What I merely started with was mixing colors on my palette that I loved and just making marks on the surface and responding to that. And what I found through that process was just how exciting it was, because I was taken on this journey where I had no idea where it was going. And so for me, on one hand, it put me out of my comfort zone because I had always, even when I had painted abstractly prior, I was always using reference material, working from observation and abstracting those things. Whereas this, it was just making marks on the surface and responding to that. And so for me, it became this just really exciting, engaging process that I love teaching, because it also just allows people to enter the concept of painting abstractly, like in a really natural way, and in a way that actually helps us get out of our head. And so the way that I approach intuitive abstraction and teach is that I want you just to actually try to get into a place of not thinking and into a place of play. And so, thinking about like not worrying about what it is you're making, not trying to make anything. All that I'm gonna be doing today is like thinking about color in that way. Like I'm thinking about how these colors relate in terms of, their color and their saturation, and their, value. but in terms of the painting, I want to almost pretend like I am a child and I'm just making marks and like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, that's interesting. And so one of like the secrets of my success and the success of my students when I'm teaching is to prep your palette with a series of value colors, which I've done today. So on my palette, I have three main colors. I have quinacridone magenta, India yellow, and indanthrone blue. I actually put a touch of Hansa yellow medium here, but I haven't used it, and I don't plan to. So just with three colors, we can mix hundreds of colors. I love a simplified color palette because you can achieve color harmony within your painting so much faster. But when I'm starting a painting, I'm really, again, often just starting with one color and just thinking about value, almost treating it like a drawing. I was going to, one of the things that I find helpful in my own studio practice, and I just put this panel, I'm gonna grab this one here. One of the things that I've found in my own painting practice is that, and also see this in other artists, sometimes when we're working on a single piece, we can get really obsessive about that piece. And everything also kind of like, you'll look at like the composition, things get closed in, and I really try to kind of break out of the boundaries of the canvas. And so I find that working on multiple simultaneously really helps me to create my paintings to be really dynamic. And so I will often have multiple substrates set up in front of me where I'm making marks and I'm actually painting through from one substrate to the next. And part of it is because what I love about intuitive painting is I'm disengaging my thinking brain and trusting my intuition of merely using my body, right? I'm moving my body, transferring my weight, like the way that I, like use my own body is like conveyed in the work through my mark making, through the pressure, and through the literal, my literal movement creates an expression of movement. And so if I want a painting that's dynamic, what happens is if we're working on one painting, an artist might be like, oh, I'm just going to do this. And then just mentally knowing that the edge of the painting is here, they stop.
Right.
And it kind of breaks the momentum. But if I'm painting through and thinking about, oh, I want my brush to go from point A to point B all the way through, my intention is to get here where like through the byproduct of that, I now have a more dynamic brushstroke. Anna, any questions?
No. Are you going to start with paintbrushes or palette knives?
I use my palette knife primarily initially mixing. Okay. As I start building up the surface, I use my knife. And I kind of change the way that I work based on the substrate that I paint on. So I love painting on canvas because of the texture and the tooth that I get from that. And seeing the grains of, like the weave and the weft of the canvas through my color when I'm wiping away. I also love working on slicker surfaces like wood panel or gessoed paper, where I get a slicker surface. I find that I build up the surface less on my panels, and I'm pulling out the light from the ground more. Mm-hmm. And so I'll be using a variety of brushes. I use, like when starting a painting, I primarily use bristle brushes, and I try to avoid small brushes. So, initially when putting the first marks on the surface of the painting, I am thinking about just covering the white space. Like I just want to kind of create my own world of color right off the bat. And that's often by kind of breaking down the white space through a color that's transparent. And I'm using bigger brushes initially because I'm just thinking about kind of like, I don't know. I'm not thinking, I'm just making marks with color. But yeah, typically I like a 2 or 3 inch brush. The bigger the painting, the bigger the substrate, the bigger the brush that I need. So I have a camera here so that you guys can see a little bit more in terms of the color mixtures, but I was going to mention here I have magenta, India, yellow, and then, you know, so I have a cool red, a warm yellow, and then a cool blue. All my colors, of course, are, as I mix white into my mixtures, all of my colors become slightly cooler with the addition of titanium white. And then I often prep my palette so that my colors become more saturated in color as they get closer to the mother hue on the palette, whereas my pure pigment right out of the tube. And then my mixtures progressively get lighter as they come closer to me, where I've mixed in more titanium white. Initially, when I'm mixing on my palette, this is kind of like my starting palette. So eventually these piles of paint I'll collide and kind of grab from, but pre-mixing values of your color allows you to get to a certain color much faster. But right now, like, I don't even know what I need yet, right? Like I haven't even made marks on the surface. I haven't even decided like what I'm even going to use for a starting color. And so I have these ready to go so that when I, you know, figure out what the painting needs, then I'll grab from those guys. Here I have my painting medium. So I work primarily in oils. And I work with oils because of my love for color, but also transparency. But if you're working with acrylics, you know, there are so many great products today that mimic the qualities of oil painting. My painting medium is a very simple recipe of refined linseed oil and Gamsol that I use to modulate the consistency of my paint. So when I'm starting out my painting, I'm working really thinly. I'm working just like a wash. Okay. So the way that I prefer to start is like not introducing any opaque colors off the bat. I like to stay with a transparent color that I'm thinning out with my medium. So that I can just, again, I'm thinking about that as soon as you, like the more pigments you add, the more complicated things get. So initially I'm just thinking about toning this and starting to make marks. And I tone it, like when we think about toning our canvas, a lot of artists pre-tone their canvas in a color. I often tone my canvas. My toning my canvas is a byproduct of me just starting to make marks on the surface and wiping and pushing through. And so through the working process, it ends up becoming toned and creates a beautiful kind of luminous light. So I'm going to grab some clean magenta here and put this over on a different side of my palette, not with all those other colors, because I just want to make sure that it doesn't accidentally collide with any of those colors. And then I'm also simultaneously like really thinning out this color to be kind of like soupy, like, you know, because I'm extending and stretching out the pigment by thinning it out. Mm-hmm. The higher quality your pigment is, usually the higher pigment load is. And so, you know, if you are purchasing good quality pigments, you will be able to like stretch your paint out while maintaining like a really clear, vibrant color much more. All right, so I'm just grabbing this bristle brush here. I'm gonna dip it into my medium. I have just straight up thinned magenta here. And now this is going to be a process where I'm just making marks on the surface. Now that I have pigment on here, you know, I don't necessarily need to scrub around with my entire brush. I'm often using a rag just as much as I'm using my brush or my palette knife. So you could use a paper towel. I also love cotton rags, which are, cut from like really soft t-shirts, because they create like a really beautiful light. But initially, when I'm just kind of roughing it out, I might come in here. And again, all I'm doing is I'm pushing the paint. I'm not thinking about the composition. I'm not thinking about what this is going to end up looking like. I'm not planning anything out. And I'm honestly, as an artist, not prescriptive as to like what works and doesn't work. Like one of the things that I have found as an artist is that I don't like following a certain prescription. Like I find that to be problematic and dangerous, in that you're just kind of doing what you know works. And so like the way that I am teaching and the way that I'm painting myself is it's always an experimentation. There'll be parts that I learned through my processing. Oh, I really love how those two colors interact. And now I want to figure out how to do that again, right? Like I'm often learning about certain things in my own work. But I'm not like always following a plan. And so in my demos, even teaching, like I have plenty of demos where I fall flat on my face. Because that's how it goes, right? Like you don't know what's going to happen. So one of the things I also find that I like about this process of simply even also like not pre-toning your canvas ahead of time, but like pushing the pigment around, is it's like this connection that you're making with your work already, where like I'm becoming acquainted with these things. Like I'm pushing pigment around, by me using my rag, I can use my hands. Like I'm also becoming acquainted with these things, the surface quality, the color, like there's a kind of connection process. And so I find that like this way of working is fantastic too, in that like it warms you up. Like before you do any sort of act, thinking about like warming yourself up, like I can't just go straight into painting. I need to kind of get loose and get into my flow, before I'm going back into a painting that's multiple stages, where I'm like, I need to like be really thoughtful and kind of direct as to what I'm doing, where this is like a totally different process where I'm not thinking and I'm just pushing stuff around, and then simultaneously just becoming connected, like mentally, spiritually, emotionally, visually, kind of seeing what's happening. These are panels, wood panels that I've gessoed. The surface quality of my paintings mean a lot to me. And so I like playing with different textures. And so for me, I don't sand my panels. I actually like the kind of striation that's left behind from gessoing. And so that's something that I start looking at. Okay, so I'm just going to lay in a little bit more saturated magenta here. So now already I have a range of values just made by my magenta, right? So like I haven't added any white. And I can like bring, the nice thing about working on a slick surface, different from say like oil paper, is I can dip my rag into my medium or solvent or water or whatever you're working in, and I can pull out the lights. And so I just find that the light that's pulled from the ground, when you're just thinning out the paint, it's just the residue of color remaining. I find that to just be like such a beautiful soft light that I like kind of using as a part of my substructure of my painting, right? So I'm coming through here and I'm not thinking. And actually by me talking to you, Anna, it helps me not be able to think.
Right.
Another thing that I do is I work fast when I'm painting. Like, and the whole arc of my art paintings paintings actually take me like 3 years to finish, especially the abstract pieces where I need time and space to like do something, put it away, look at it again. But the actual painting process for me initially goes really fast. And part of it is because I'm using speed as a way to kind of like bypass my brain. And so sometimes for me, like if I'm just making marks really quickly, again, I'm using my body in a physical way, I might like, where I'm becoming kind of witness to like how my body is dictating, and doing things. I totally lost my train of thought.
Well, that painting fast,
Oh
you
yeah.
stop thinking. You don't
Yeah,
have time to think, and your body takes over from.
Yeah. So I find that like I, as an artist, feel more creative when I'm trusting myself. And so when I was working representationally for so long, I felt like a really academic painter. Like that was my inner critic voice saying like, people would say, you're so talented. Like, and for me, it felt like I was, I could paint really well, but I didn't believe in my own creativity. And so when I'm painting intuitively, like it teaches me about like just trusting yourself, just making marks and responding to it and being witnessed. Like this is what art making is all about, like getting into that space of mystery, where, yeah. And so like I want to kind of slow down or pause and suspend the moment of like, what are you doing? What's that? This looks really bad. Like that critical voice that creeps in. By going fast often, it doesn't give me time to work it out. Or at least time to kind of analyze rather. So now I have my magenta here, and now I have a series of mixtures in my palette, and I'm just going to start grabbing colors and see what happens. So I'm grabbing some of this India yellow mixture here, and see how it starts, dragging my brush through the paint. I also think it's really important to constantly rotate the pieces so that you're looking at it in a different way. We can kind of become fixated on certain things, and then we turn it around. It helps us see something. It helps it see it differently. So I'm grabbing, this is a tint of my blue, and I have a dirty brush right now because I've come through here and I'm painting wet on wet, where I'm allowing that blue to blend with the orange. I'm allowing my color to get kind of muddy in there. I often, when I'm working in this way, also will kind of designate brushes for certain color families just to help me kind of keep my color cleaner. Like if I want to grab a certain color, I want that to be the color. So what I do is instead of like also taking time to clean my brush or whatever, like I just kind of have one brush for blues and so now I've made a series of marks on the surface. I've started introducing a darker blue, and now I have something to work with, right? Like I've made marks, and now I'm starting to respond to that, right? Like I have to engage the thinking brain. I'm no longer like not thinking. Now I'm kind of like, oh, look at what happens there, like. And then now it's like re-engaging the thinking brain and starting to kind of strategize and see what's happening, but allow my painting to kind of tell me where to go. So, I might take, my painting and look at it from different orientations and kind of just like see what's happening, see how they're related or not related. And then put it in an orientation that I feel most interested in. You know, like, oh, that's kind of interesting. Like, I'm trying to make things that I haven't made before. My goal is not to just recreate the same thing, right? So I want to put myself in a place where I'm like, huh, like, I haven't done that before, or like, that's interesting, right? And then I'm also thinking about visual relationships of this, like these two together. Here's again where, you know, like working with, you know, say like slow open acrylics or oils. Like I just find that the open drying time to be really wonderful and like allowing me to extend the notion of playing and moving things around and not feeling committal about anything. Like I find that part for me to be really important in terms of like getting into a place where I'm not worrying about making a mistake because I know that I can wipe it down and scrape it down, you know, like, you know, I can wipe this whole thing down. Like if I'm doing this and I'm like, oh, it's all turned to mud, I don't like that's okay. Like keep going, you know, like see what happens from that. And like there's paintings, plenty of paintings of mine in the wiping down process when all of a sudden they worked. And so this is often like where I love starting. And again, I'm not like by not pre-toning the canvas or the panel in this case, like it allows me to kind of play around with the light and to pull the light out from the ground in a way like that feels very kind of like soft and mysterious. Where that's where I go. Like I find that to be like it's kind of you know, often suggestive of how we experience light in reality. But for me as an artist, I'm often drawn, you know, we all are like physiologically, optically drawn to light. And so I like being able to kind of play around with pulling the light out of the
Hey,
work.
Cameron, I will give you, we're about at 20 something minutes.
Okay.
So do you, are you gonna work? You wanna work with more details or?
I'm gonna lay in a couple tints in here.
Okay.
Just because I'm curious.
Okay.
And then I'm gonna switch to a painting that's in progress. And I'm gonna use kind of what's remaining here to work on that.
Okay.
That sound good?
Sounds good.
Only because I can't help myself. The hardest part when you start painting is stopping, right? So I'm just going to see what happens by coming in and playing around with more opaque colors over the more saturated transparent tones. Ah,
That looks fabulous.
on to the next. All right.
Right.
So this
And
is
you
the
can
way
totally see, we could totally see you getting into it and the way you're moving and moving with the paint. I'd
yeah,
say.
yeah. Getting into that flow space, you know, and this is where I think prepping your palette with the paints is really helpful, because then I'm just like, oh, like what is my menu here, like of ingredients, and then I kind of grab and modify and that kind of thing. And then also, because I have no idea what I'm doing, you know, I'm building my composition through the making, right? And so it's a process of problem solving. Like, oh, maybe I need more lights, or my eyes getting stuck here. Maybe I need more contrast. Like maybe I need to desaturate these colors. But like I didn't need anything here. I didn't come with any ideas other than the colors that it's on my palette. And even so, that's not necessarily going to predict what a painting may look like, right? I just simplified my palette. So yeah, so I love starting this way as a way to just kind of ignite an idea, where I then just go with it and I see what happens. And then, you know, sometimes I'm like, oh, I love this. And other times I'm like, oh, none of this works. But at least I have something to work with. Like, I think for so many artists, starting is like the hardest thing, you know?
And that's what you want to show us next, right? Like that you had a painting that you
so I have this painting
weren't super happy with, or
that I'm not thrilled with. I've kind of overworked this painting lots of times. It looks like by the ID number in the back, I started in 2022.
Okay.
So this has kind of gone through a lot of different iterations, but a lot of it has involved me using transparent colors and going over. Recently, I was actually demoing a glaze and then started wiping down and put it aside. So this remains to be like an unresolved painting that was a part of kind of like a triptych. And so I find that working intuitively can be helpful in terms of going over pre-existing paintings. And so, and I know a lot of artists who do similar things where they're actually working abstractly on a representational painting and vice versa, right? And so sometimes there's certain paintings where you're like, I just need to let it go. But it potentially creates like all that paintings ends up being an underpainting and creates such beautiful, rich color combinations as a result of all those previous layers. So that's why I never throw anything away. Like I'm always like, oh, you know, kind of, I have so many different works in process. I'm always putting things aside. And if they don't work out, it's annoying and it's frustrating. But I'm kind of like, well, I've been painting long enough that I know that like eventually that will reemerge as something else. I just don't know what it is now.
All right, let's see how you resolve that or get started again on that one.
Yeah, so the things that like for me to kind of just tell you, like I loved this part before. It kind of felt like this like ethereal space. I felt like I was kind of like in this foggy, kind of like misty, vernal area. And I feel like the more times I've gone into it, I've been kind of tentative and I'm trying to like preserve the thing that was there before, but it's preventing me from breaking through. This compositionally, I find like this has become really heavy. So just looking at this, I know I need to I need to have brighter, lighter color. Initially, I was trying to pull out my light here. And I need to break through. So I am going to grab a brush here, and maybe go over to like my lightest values here so that I'm making a really big jump, because this is a relatively kind of darker mid-tone painting. And you know, when coming back into a painting, it's not that I'm like, I'm trying to like, oh, you know, I mean, you can do that and that leads to like interesting paintings too. but, you know, I want to kind of like, you know, I might decide to use certain parts of it, but like, a lot of times I find that I have to like break out of the previous composition.
Mhm.
And so, you know, like, for instance, if I turn it as a horizontal, that allows me to kind of helps me. I'm gonna put this straight. Um, helps me kind of forget about what was there. And I find that like the longer we work on something, the smaller our marks get. You know, again, we're like zoning in on things. And that's when this is where I'm like, you know, the bigger the brush for going back into a painting, I find like the better, because it prevents us from getting caught up in the details and just really like, you know, think about like making shapes with color. I would imagine, Anna, like you with your collage, like you know, probably do this too, like in a different way where you cut things up, you know, like you're like, I love these things and I'm attached to them, but it's not working. And so I just need to cut it up. And so it can still be there, parts of it, you know.
Right.
But
And I think too is approaching it as, you know, what I can see when I'm watching you is like you're not afraid to just go over things and, you know, mess it up again and like, right?
yes. And it is always a process of messing it up again. I'm so glad you said that, because like our goals as artists, it's not to make this perfect thing. It's like, again, it's discovery. And so for me, I'm kind of like, I'm now making marks because I'm like, you know how sometimes you keep for me, sometimes a painting can keep going back and looking like what it was before, what I was trying to get away from. Where like I kind of just want to start seeing something new. And this is what's so liberating about working abstractly, is you can turn it upside down and turn it on its side. Like, you know, something where it's like the composition just isn't working. Like it's just not working. And this is where it's just like so liberating, I feel like, to be like, all right, like lean into it, accept it, it's okay. Like it's meant to be something else. And now I'm just going to see what that might be. And so now, like, also I can decide, like, you know, I could bring it back to a vertical format now where I've worked in different orientations, and now I'm not seeing it as the same thing. Right. And so I can start like, again, working thinly. So here, you know, I can pull now, like instead of pulling out the lights from my ground, I'm pulling out darks from my ground because I've gone lighter over darker. I'm making this color grayer because it's now like a thinned out white. And some, you know, when I'm painting, as I was saying before, like I often move fast to try to not think. And then like again, I play with speed. So sometimes I'm moving fast, which is going to create a certain kind of mark, which feels muscular and physical and fast. And then I also like play around with like barely touching the canvas and just dragging my brush and very lightly and letting those marks do something, right? And so much of making art, with every new mark we make, it changes, right? And so my job is just to continue to stay witness to what's happening in front of me, and then to see that. Like the hardest part with our own work, like is seeing what's happening in front of us. And so one of the things that I've learned as a painter is that I really need time to look at my work, because it's really hard to process everything that's in front of us. And then also, like, what something looks like when you're up close and personal to it versus what something looks like 20 feet away can be very different, especially in terms of the things that we become fixated on. Like sometimes there's things where you're like, oh, I don't like this, da, da, da. And then you take a photograph of it, and then you look at it your phone from a different location, and you're like, oh, that part actually works. Like that actually is the interesting part of the painting, but I was so close to it physically and emotionally that I lost sight of it. And I'm thinking it's a problem when actually it's creating this, interesting color effect or optical effect that is maybe what makes the painting work. And so, yeah, so I find that like, what's most important is like being open. And then with working on something like a pre-existing painting, laying new things on it so that you see it in a different way, and then bringing some parts back, like I could take a brush and just dip it into solvent, a clean brush, and I could just lift my pigment. It's so interesting. I can actually see my painting better through the camera because it's giving me distance,
Yes.
And one of the things I love about working, I prefer, so when I'm painting, I often try to plan my painting days so that there are multiple paintings in a row. Because I like working over a wet surface where my colors blend and like dance with the colors that are there. I find that I achieve, like, on one hand, right, when someone's learning how to paint with oils, initially they might say, oh, like the color gets so muddy, because they're used to the color drying really fast and doing things in layers, where I find that is like the beauty of it, is you get these really beautiful grays. And the way that, like a brush stroke, if I was going to lay a darker toned, I'm just going to grab this brush that has magenta on it, and I'm going to grab my green, I'm going to muddy it with, so now it's like a warmer kind of neutralized green because I added magenta to my green. Like it's just a matter of like seeing, oh, look at like that's now brown, like just keeping it all open to an experiment. And not getting too caught up again, like, what is it? What am I doing? Oh God, what is this? It's just like staying open and being kind of again aware of what the material can do for you. And allow the brushes to overlap, like allow the color to get muddy. It's okay. Like we're all gonna be okay. Like, again,
I just want to interject right there. I think what you said is very important. It's going to be okay, and we can keep going, and it's also going to be, like the in this intuitive process, if you stop now, it's going to be okay, but if you keep going, it's also going to be okay at some point, right?
Yeah.
For timing, we're about 35 to 40 minutes. Do you want to paint 2 more minutes?
Sure.
Do you want to leave it as is?
Yeah. I'm gonna turn it another orientation. Just 'cause I don't think I looked at it in this orientation. So it's all a matter of my nails lining up. And seeing. And so I feel a painting out. I'm like, how does it feel? That's what I asked myself. How does it feel? Where is my eye going? And so, you know, I'm looking at this and I don't like how it's like this, like, you know, so that tells me, and there's something about this shape in here that's coming across, that's kind of breaking this diagonal momentum. So that tells me that I need to kind of break through this. I'm a very messy painter. So I usually have like 3 or 4 palettes going at once because I mix a lot of colors and I'm very messy. I think of painting often like a Ouija board. So
All right.
anyways,
I was
But
gonna
here's an example where I feel like color-wise, it's so much more dynamic than it was before, right? Like this is not by no means like there's so much problem solving to still happen. But for me, I'm like way more excited about going back into this painting than it was the other painting, right? Like the other one still had promise. There was still light there. But at a certain point, I couldn't let go of what was there, and it was hindering me from pushing the painting to the next level. So for me, I know like the best strategy to not waste the canvas is like put some, I think you can do different things. You could use pigments that are totally different or pigments that are similar. If you're pulling back some of the color, I find that like having some similar pigments is good. But you end up making work that's like so much more surprising and engaging and exciting. I love sharing this process. And this is one of the things I love about teaching is just like helping people break out of the rut and just like be in a place of exploration and play with materials where you're literally just like, exploring color and marks and not worrying about what it is.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much, Cameron, for sharing that with us. Thanks everybody for watching. I just want to quickly say, so Cameron's going to be doing a course at Mastrius. And this is one of the processes, ideas that she is going to be sharing with people and more. It's going to be a live course. And you can get all the information on the website at mastrius.com. The timing and dates and all of that. Because it's live and interactive online course, you will be able to ask your questions, bring your paintings, paint along, do a little bit of homework in between probably, and all of that. So Cameron can help you push to the next level. Everything we do at Mastrius is live interaction. Online, you can get your questions answered in real time, and you have a master right there to help you on the steps when you're unsure of where to go. Again, thanks so much, Cameron, and I'm super excited to see what the course is going to be all about.
Yay! Me too. I'm so thrilled.
All right.